John Rockefeller created Standard Oil in 1870 during the Second Industrial Revolution in the United States, from 1867 to 1914. During this time, America experienced an economic boom due to railroads, increasingly efficient ways of communicating over long distances, such as the telephone and the radio, and more efficient ways of producing goods and materials as a result of mass production and economies of scale. John Rockefeller took advantage of the innovations of the 19th century in a unique and unparalleled way, and came to influence business for all time. The net result of John Rockefeller's career was that he forever changed the way that business would be done in the United States, and even the world. Hence his life and the way he created and ran Standard Oil currently represents a major turning point in American history. After various business ventures, at the request of Samuel Andrews, Rockefeller came to finance a refinery. He knew that efficiency and thriftiness could result in larger profit margins. For example, he noted that sulfuric acid remained after the refining process. Instead of wasting the acid, he converted it to fertilizer. One day he noted an error in a plumber's bill, which caused him to buy plumbing equipment for the plant and to hire a company plumber. Later, when demand made barrels difficult to get, he set up a barrel-making operation. He even had the wood dried before it was shipped to the plant, because it would weigh half as much, lessening the shipping costs. In 1870, Rockefeller changed the company name to Standard Oil. He strived to create a standard of kerosene for which all competitors must meet. Rockefeller knew that there was a huge profit to be made in the oil industry. But not by drilling for oil, by refining oil. He understood that he would not be able to make a steady profit from oil drilling, given its boom and bust nature.
Rockefeller had created such dominance that he could squash competition, lowering his prices to the point where his competitors couldn't exist, they couldn't survive.
In 1872, John Rockefeller was involved in something later called the Cleveland Conquest. Standard Oil absorbed 22 of its 26 Cleveland competitors. Rockefeller used two techniques in order to create one of the first successful monopolies in industrial America. Rockefeller's first method was to show the smaller refinery owner Standard Oil's profits. Many of the business owners at that point would realize that Standard was much more successful than they were, and they would accept Rockefeller's money. The few business owners that did not accept the money would then have to compete with Rockefeller head-on. Rockefeller would undercut the opposition's prices until they were run into the ground. Rockefeller would then buy the company's assets at an auction.
A monopoly exists in a given industry, like, for example, soft drinks or automobile manufacturing, where a supplier, because it is so big, can say to its customers, "You really don't have any alternatives other than to buy from me, because I, in fact, am so big and control the industry."
In 1877, Standard clashed with the Pennsylvania Railroad, Standard Oil's chief hauler. Rockefeller had always envisioned the use of pipelines as an alternative transport system for oil and began a campaign to build and acquire them. The railroad, seeing Standard's movement into pipeline fields, struck back and formed a subsidiary to buy and build oil refineries and pipelines. Standard countered and held back its shipments, and with the help of other railroads started a price war that dramatically reduced freight costs. Rockefeller eventually prevailed, and the railroad sold all of its oil interests to Standard. By monopolizing the industry, Rockefeller and Standard Oil controlled 90% of the U.S. oil refining capacity in 1879. Standard Oil gained control of the oil refining industry in the United States not only by using horizontal integration, but by introducing its own system of vertical integration. It supplied kerosene by tank cars that brought the fuel directly to local markets, and tank wagons then delivered to retail customers, thus bypassing the existing network of wholesale marketers. In the 1880s, many legislatures had made it difficult to incorporate in one state and operate in another. As a result, Rockefeller and his associates owned dozens of separate corporations operating in just one state, making the management of their whole enterprise rather cumbersome. In 1882, Rockefeller's lawyers created a form of corporation to centralize their assets, giving birth to the Standard Oil Trust. The trust was a corporation of corporations. 9 trustees, including Rockefeller, ran the 41 companies in the trust. Standard Oil had become the richest, biggest, most feared business in the world, seemingly immune to the boom and bust of the business cycle, consistently racking up profits year after year. Standard Oil's American empire included over 4,000 miles of pipeline, 5,000 tank cars, and over 100,000 employees. Its share of world oil refining topped out above 90%, but slowly dropped to about 80% for the rest of the century. In the early 1880s, Rockefeller created one of his most important innovations. Rather than try to influence the price of crude oil directly, Standard Oil had been exercising indirect control by altering oil storage charges to suit market conditions. Rockefeller then decided to order the issuance of certificates against oil stored in Standard Oil's pipelines. These certificates became traded by speculators, thus creating the first oil futures market, which effectively set spot market prices from then on. The National Petroleum Exchange opened in Manhattan in late 1882 to facilitate the oil futures trading. Rockefeller had created such a firm grasp on American business that he helped to create the political climate that led to the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act. This act banned trusts and monopolies that lessened interstate and international trade. The act gave the government the power to shatter big companies into smaller pieces. This act was a direct result of Standard Oil's monopoly. Although the Sherman Antitrust Act took apart Rockefeller's monopoly, the outlaw of trusts changed America forever. No monopolies meant that companies would always be in price wars, heavily benefiting the consumer, and allowed for small business, a staple of the American economy. John Rockefeller's career represents a key turning point in American history. In the pursuit of the ever more efficient and profitable business, John Rockefeller created the first oil refinery business. He created a standard product that helped businesses and consumers. He created a network of oil pipelines. He organized the first oil futures market. He organized a trust, and he utilized the waste products of his refinery. In addition to creating revenue for Standard Oil, these innovations furthered industrial growth that powered the Industrial Revolution and led us into the modern era. Rockefeller's innovations also led to Standard Oil's monopoly in the oil industry. Hence, he unintentionally helped create the political will to regulate industry. When the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed by Congress, in part in response to Standard Oil's dominance and questionable practices, it prevented any other company or business person from gaining so much control over a market in the U.S. The Sherman Act was ultimately used in 1911 to break Standard Oil into 90 separate companies, resulting in competition, which led to lower prices and improved products that benefited consumers. Today, thanks to John Rockefeller, we see a mix of big, medium, and smaller businesses, and a role for government and business regulation. By combining business innovation with the technological innovations of the 19th century, John Rockefeller ended up changing the way business is done forever. He created the modern innovative business and set the stage for others like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, who would build on what he started that would ultimately help make the 20th century the American century.